Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to my channel English Superstars. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon. Today we are going to talk about analyzing poetry. We are going to talk about what are the steps that are used in analyzing a poem, and also in this video you will get many different examples on which we are going to analyze it stepwise. So let's begin. Step number 1 in analyzing poetry talks about reading. As a teacher, you should read it first with your students in class aloud. As a student, you should read it in your heart first, go through the vocabulary and then read it aloud. So you need to discuss the poem structure and rhythm as well. For example, are the lines short and meant to be read slow, or does the poem move fast? If so, why? Step number 2 is about title. Think about the title and how it relates to the poem. Sometimes titles often provide important clues about what is at the heart of a piece. For example, it may work ironically or in opposition to a poem. So what are the questions that you need to consider? Does the title immediately change how you think about it? Does the poem's title paint a picture that gives a specific time frame, setting, or action? Like, what does it tell you about? Does it imply multiple possibility? So while looking at the title, you need to see what is it conveying to the meaning. What is it trying to tell you about the poem? And while reading the poem, you get to know, is it similar to that of the title or is it something different? So remember, there are 6 steps and they were first 2 steps. Step number 3 is speaker. Understanding the speaker is at the center of a poem may help the piece appear more tangible to students because they are able to imagine a person behind the language. Question to consider are: who tells the poem? Alright, who is the narrator? Does the poem give any clues about the speaker's personality, the point of view, age, or gender? What is it telling you? Who is the speaker addressing? Is it you? Is it general public? Is it a specific group of people? Does the speaker seem attached or detached from what it is said or from what is said? Alright, so who is the speaker you need to understand, because speaker is at the heart of the piece. So if you get to know who is the speaker, the narrator himself, the poet himself, or third person or the first person, or who is it talking to you or to a specific group of people, it clears a lot of things. Coming to step number 4. Step number 4 talks about mood and tone. So after talking about the speaker, it's important to address the attitude or mood the poem is attempting to convey. Some can be brooding or grieving. Definitely it can be a sad poem. Others may have a song-like cadence and rhythm, just like Wordsworth poetry. Discuss the attitude each speaker or characters give off. Moreover, talk about if there are places where the poem's tone may stitch and why. If it's switching from one mood to another, from one tone to another, so you need to understand, maybe the poet was happy at the beginning but now sad at the end and he's reminiscing something about his past, or maybe he was happy in the start and he's sad towards the end. Okay, so you need to understand the tone. This is also a good time to talk syntax and effect certain words have on us. So syntax, the structure of sentence, what kind of effect it has on us. Then we have paraphrase. Definitely, since you discussed figurative language, mood, setting, speaker, language itself, so there's no better time to apply what you have learned line by line. Paraphrasing is each line, explaining each line. Paraphrasing may seem pretty self-explanatory. Paraphrasing, paragraph is there and you are changing it, explaining it. However, keep in mind, this is not about skipping lines or condensing. Instead, you should lead students line by line and translate figurative language or unclear phrases into similar terms. So, in analyzing a poem, another important thing is to paraphrase every sentence. In every sentence, you get to know that in these lines, the poet has tried to talk about this issue. Alright, so you look at the language and you try to explain it. If there is any difficult word, if there is a metaphor, a simile, or if there is a reference, an allusion to something that happened in the past or to some mythological figure. So there are references made. So you need to understand those things as well. Step number 6 is theme. Last but not the least, it's time to get to the core of what the poem is about by identifying its theme. The theme of a poem relates to a universal truth, issue, or conflict. To determine the theme, look all over your analysis and connect the dots. Alright? And what does that mean? What is the subject? Who is the speaker? What situation are they in? How do they feel about the subject? And what is the mood? So theme tells you all about these things. If it was written on World War I, it is going to relate to aimlessness, hollowness. If it is about nature, it is going to tell you about a nice song, a beautiful lady. So you need to look at the theme, what the poem is talking to, or is it relating to something. Now, one thing here I would add as well, that you should also look a little bit into the biography, or not biography, just look at the poet. Who is the poet? You get a lot of ideas when you look at the name of the poet. If the poet is Wordsworth, it's nature. If the poet is Eliot, it's about World War I or hollowness. So once you look at the poet, if it's about Keats or Shelley, so you get to know that some of them wrote about Nightingale, they wrote about odes. If you look at Shakespeare's sonnet, so you will understand a lot by looking at the poet. So have a little bit idea about that as well. Now let's analyze these things on a piece of literature, that is poetry itself. So here we are going to analyze all these topics and points, and we'll break it down on different examples. Alright. Now first of all, you need to choose a poem of your own. For example, you are choosing Kubla Khan by Coleridge, or you choose Ode to a Nightingale by Keats, or you choose Solitary Reaper by William Wordsworth. Alright. So you need to break the poem apart. But before that, identify its basic content. You should be able to summarize your poem. So what's the first thing? That you need to summarize your poem. Create a summary that focuses on the thoughts of the poem. So take a rough register or a page. Write about the summary of that poem. What does it talk about? Okay. However, you may not need to include it, okay? In your analysis, you do not need to write that summary. That is just for your understanding. Write it on a piece of paper first. Alright. Since you can actually usually assume your readers will know about the poem is about. Alright, so this is for your own explanation, okay? It's written, you don't need to include it on your analysis. It's just for your own interpretation, but do write the summary. For example, Edgar Allan Poe, the poem is The Raven. It is about a man who is haunted by a raven and the memory of the woman he loved. Alright, so it's definitely about a tragedy. It's a sad poem, okay? So it also sometimes helpful to label the sections of the poem. Can you find the pattern of an organization? If you find it, label it. Stanzas may guide, but even poems don't divide into obvious stanzas, sections differently. A Shakespearean sonnet, for example, can be divided into 4 parts. So look at the poem, write it somewhere and start dividing it. Okay. First of all, write the summary of it. You get to know, okay, it is talking about these things. Then divide the poem if it can be divided, okay. Not every poem can be divided like this, but here you have a Shakespearean sonnet. Shall I compare thee to a summer days? Okay. Summer's day. Now, she's more lovely than summer because she's warmer and gentler than summer. She's fairer because the sun doesn't always shine and summer's beauty fades. Okay. So, just like that, and the couplet is here. All of this is because the poet has made her unloveliness immortal with his poetry. It is divided into section 1 that talks about one thing, section 2, section 3, and the couplet. You may not read to write about these elements in your essay, but think about them before you write it. So remember, there is always a pre-writing stage, while writing stage, and post-writing stage. Right now we are talking about pre-writing stage, that you do not need to write. Just clear it in your mind, write it on a rough register, alright? Then you need to look at narrators, characters, and settings. So it also includes structure. Consider narrator. Now remember, the person voicing the words is not necessarily the author. For example, in Forsaken Merman, the speaker is the merman rather than the poet. So Matthew Arnold, also consider to whom the poem is addressed. Now there are many such poems, for example, The Mother, where first speaks to another mother, to other mothers who had, an abortion in the past, and then switches to addressing the babies who were never born. Definitely, because they were aborted, so they were never born. So the speaker switches from there, just like in novels as well. This happens. Sometimes one person is speaking and then the narrator switches from one to the other person. And we get to know the story from their point of view, okay? So these are some examples right in front of you. You can pause the screen, you can read them as well. So you need to find out who the narrator is, what are the characters. For example, in Solitary Reaper, there is just one character who is the reaper, the lady, a Scottish lady who is reaping the crops, okay? So there is only one character and the poet himself. So the narrator is the poet himself. What is the setting? Setting is the country yard, alright? So it's a country where she's reaping it. Then you need to look at the structure of the poem. For example, which time, which year, which place, anything that it is going to tell you about. The structure of the poem considered the type of the poem the author chose to write. So it can be, you know, a sonnet as well. There are a number of poetic forms and the poets will choose one carefully. Think about its rhythm as well. Alright, is it slow, halting? Did the author use a specific meter? Meter measures the number of stress and unstressed syllables. I hope you know that. For example, in an iambic pentameter, the most commonly used meter in English, each line is 10 syllables with a stress on every second syllable. The time of year, though missed, and me, behold. So there's a stress on the second one, alright? Then you look at the tone of it. What's the tone? The tone is difficult, the tone is easy. Look at this. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. So is it difficult? It's not. Robert Frost stopping by the woods on a snowy evening. So consider the effect of these words. The first line creates a comforting haven of woods. The woods are lovely, dark and deep. So the next three lines of those of weary traveler. But I have promises to keep. The repetition of miles to go before I sleep makes the reader feel the narrator's longing for rest. He wants to take some rest. So, okay, so you can also pause the video over here and read this. Then come to diction. Now, diction is the use of language, alright? For example, you need to examine the words that are used and how they are used to create an impression. Here it says, and how they are used to create an impression using sensory images. For example, touch, taste, smell, sight, and sound. So these are the senses that are used to create a certain imagery for the reader. Okay, skin remembers how long the hairs grow. Now skin remembers, see, when the skin is not touched. So you would see that how diction has used to create imagery. And metaphor you already know, you know, a grey tunnel, a feather lost from the tail of a bird. The tunnel signifies a void with no end. The fact that the tunnel is grey renders its vague and ghostliness. So sometimes such words are intentionally used, you know, to create an imagery, but also that is a metaphor. So use of metaphor is used to enhance the beauty of poetry. Then you come to the thesis statement. Now what is that? Statement of meaning. For example, Eliot's The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock is about a man in prison. Now this is a very long poem. It talks about a man who is imprisoned in the mediocre life and he has chosen dreaming of things he lacks the courage to do. What does he want to convey? Ordinary and oppressive world where Prufrock lives in. So Eliot's poems, you know, most of his poems are like The Wasteland, Hollow Man and J. Alfred Prufrock itself. It talks about darker side of life, okay? So, you know, which is more like about the hollowness and aimlessness in people. So here as well, you get to know that, you know, in one way or the other, so the poet talks about these things. All the summaries are written over here right in front of you. So this is how you outline your paragraphs and you choose your evidence. Now, how are you going to write it on a piece of paper in an assignment? First of all, you're going to choose a poem. Let me show it to you. For example, I've just written The Solitary Reaper by William Wordsworth on Google, and here you have the poem right in front of you, okay? First you go through it, read it. So it's talking about a lady, a woman who is in the field in Scotland and she's reaping the crops. Alright, so there are how many characters? 2. What is the setting? Countryside in Scotland. Now, what is it about? It is about nature, because when you look at William Wordsworth, the one who has written about daffodils, Solitary Reaper, the Westminster Bridge, you get to know it's about nature. So then first you write its summary on a piece of paper, okay? Put it aside. Then you write characters, theme, narrator. Who is the narrator? Who is talking about it? Write it somewhere else. Then paraphrase it line by line, write it somewhere. Now combine all these things. Right, step number 1 was to remember, look at the title. So, right, step number 1, title, analyzing the title. The term solitary reaper itself talks about a person who is in solitude, or one who is enjoying his own company, and reaper means a person or a machine that is used to harvest the crops. Okay, that is number 1. Then you talk about number 2. Number 2 is about, what was it about? Writing the theme of it. So it's not must that you go step 1, 2, 3, 4. It can be alternative. 2, 3, 1, 4 as well can happen. So it's fine. Just make sure your analysis is fine. Step number 3, looking at the theme. So the theme is about nature, because the poet is standing in a field and in solitude he is trying to listen to the song of a reaper. It's a pretty lady who is there working in the field. So relate these things. Step number 1, this poem talks about this thing. Step number 2, this poem talks about these things. And this is how you're going to write your whole analysis on the basis of those 6 steps. Remember all those steps: title, speaker, focus on mood, tone, paraphrase, theme, all of these things. So give the heading number 1, title. The title of this poem talks about these things. Step number 2, structure, and if you're going with mood and tone. So mood of the poem is, how is it? It's happy, because solitary reaper talks about a happy tone, alright? So how do you know that? Because the use of these words tell you that it's about a happy song, or these words that are used tell about a misery. Paraphrasing of every sentence line by line, okay? And then you get to the theme of it. So coming back to this poem, if you look at it, he says, some natural sorrow, loss or pain. So you can quote these words, natural sorrow, loss or pain. They are telling about the song. The song the reaper is singing is a sad song. Okay, so this way you are going to break your poem into different steps. Step number 1, reading aloud. Step number 2, title. Step number 3, structure, tone, narrator. You can make these different steps. You can even make 7, 8, 9, 10 steps according to your own self. But make sure you choose a piece of literature, a poem that is worth reading, okay? It has certain meaning, conveys something, has an ideology behind it, and then talk about it. So that was all from my side. Don't forget to like and share the video. Thank you for watching. Allah Hafiz.